In 1971, my father passed away. I was only 2 years old at that time. Since I was still a child, my family rarely mentioned him to me. All I knew was that he was a kind man. Growing up in an environment that lacked a father's love was not easy for me. While growing up, I often missed my father. Whenever I was in trouble, I longed for my father's guidance and support. My life seemed to be going well, but in reality I was deeply dissatisfied with the way I was living. I had been trying to be kind to the other people around me, but my life still sucked. This made me feel like a complete failure and I was in deep despair and depression. During that time, my heart was filled with pain. I prayed to God to be freed from the pain. After 3 years of marriage, my wife and I separated, which further increased my sense of despair. I had no control over anything and everything became meaningless. During that time, I stayed at a friend's house. I stopped eating regularly and I locked myself in my room all day. I lost all interest and motivation in life. That day, I was about to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I entered the kitchen, my vision began to blur and I felt the air around me become heavy. As I picked up the glass, I felt the whole room spin. I fainted on the kitchen floor. My head began to hurt intensely and it felt like a heavy rock was pressing against my head. I tried to get back up, but my body had no more strength. Finally, I felt like I was slowly leaving this world. Suddenly, my view came up to the ceiling. I could see myself lying on the floor. My view was wide and clear, and my body was lying quietly on the floor, without the slightest movement. My body was like an abandoned stone. It had lost the state I once knew. I realized that this was what it really looked like. I didn't connect with it emotionally when I looked at it. I felt myself transcend the bonds of the physical world. I was now free of the bonds of my body. And I felt free and pure. Suddenly, a darkness enveloped me. Just then, a bright light penetrated the darkness. The light gradually gathered into a female figure. She appeared before me like an angel, emanating an aura of peace and tranquility. She gazed at me with loving eyes. Her voice was very gentle. She seemed to know my inner pain and confusion and was willing to listen to what I had to say. Her presence gave me courage and strength, making me feel less alone and helpless. I knew that this female figure was the Virgin Mary. Her presence not only relieved my inner pain, but also purified my heart. In her company, I reviewed my past life. She helped me to re-experience and understand the experiences that had caused me pain. I saw the loneliness and frustration I had often experienced. The Blessed Virgin Mary did not leave me in sorrow. Instead, she encouraged me to learn from it and to transform that pain into inner strength and opportunities for growth. She showed me the effects and consequences of my past actions. With her selfless love and wisdom, the Blessed Virgin Mary guided me to re-examine my way of life. The Blessed Virgin Mary led me into a sacred space. There, time no longer mattered. This space was filled with divine energy and gave me an overwhelming sense of relaxation and peace. I arrived in front of a huge archway that was magnificent. The arch seemed to connect the passage between earth and heaven. It seemed to be sending me an invitation. Suddenly, a bell rang out, and it was so melodious. Its sound echoed throughout the space. Then, I heard the beautiful singing of the angels. Their voices were very pure. The songs were filled with blessings and joy. They welcomed my arrival. As I heard these beautiful voices, I was filled with doubts inside. Is this all for me? Do I deserve this kind of treatment? I am just a very ordinary person, from an ordinary family with an ordinary education. I have no special achievements or contributions. Do these solemn courtesies really belong to me? These questions filled my heart. And I felt how small I was. The Blessed Virgin Mary seemed to sense my doubts. She told me that heaven does not measure a person's past achievements. Here, every soul is equal. Every soul is irreplaceable. No matter what your past is, you are worthy to be accepted. Here, I also met Jesus. He did not take the specific form we are familiar with, but I was able to perceive his presence. He radiated an endless light that was filled with compassion and wisdom. I could feel his unconditional love, which surpassed any human emotion that could be experienced. The light of Jesus wraps around me and warms my soul. He does not need words to communicate with me. There is a spiritual communication between us that transcends words. I could feel his love as he drew near to me, a feeling I cannot describe in exact words. He asked me, "Do you really want to die like this?" My heart became very complicated. I knew that in front of him, there was no way for me to lie. I also didn't know how I should answer him. I didn't have the courage to say an affirmative answer because I wasn't sure if I really wanted to give up my life. I wanted help and guidance. I said to Jesus, "Lord, I am not sure." I felt great pain and despair inside. Please lead me, give me wisdom and courage, and help me to find true life. My answer was not perfect, but it was my truest thought. Jesus knows the pain and confusion in my heart. In this moment, he showed me two different kinds of my life and helped me see the possibilities of the future. In the first scene, I saw myself surrounded by darkness and I appeared in an abandoned city. I am standing alone on a deserted street. The walls of the buildings were covered with faded paint. Disappointment and despair filled my heart, and a look of helplessness spread across my face. I tried to walk forward, but every step was heavy and difficult, as if a stone was pressing down on me. I felt the power of self-destruction, which relentlessly bound me in the darkness. Next, I saw a second scene. I saw myself appearing in a garden. The sun was pouring down on me, giving me warmth and vitality. I was standing on a patch of grass with flowers emitting an enchanting fragrance. I felt inner peace and joy, and a smile spread across my face. Surrounded by the laughter and cheers of people who care for and support each other, I take confident and light steps. Jesus asked me which kind of life you want. I answered, "The second one." He whispered, "My child, you have made a wise choice. I cannot interfere directly with human behavior, but I will guide you to the true life. You need to find inner peace. I will give you the strength and courage to face the challenges of life." Jesus paused, then continued, "Above all, believe that you are worthy. Don't measure your worth by external standards." I listened carefully to Jesus' guidance. I answered Jesus reverently, "Lord, I will listen to your guidance, try to find inner peace, and influence others with love. I will believe in my own values and start a new life." Jesus said to me, "My child, you have taken an important step. I will walk with you until you find a truly meaningful life. Be assured that my love will always be with you." I felt hope and courage inside because I knew that with Jesus by my side, would be on a path full of light. I know that it is time to get out of here. Jesus wrapped me in his light and I felt an overwhelmingly gentle power. We slowly passed through the huge archway, and the scene before me was fading away. When I re-entered the earth, I found myself lying on a soft bed. The sun was shining through the window and the warmth filled the air. I felt my body filled with strength and my mind became clear. Beside the bed, the Blessed Virgin Mary sat quietly, her eyes full of care. I looked at her gratefully, knowing that she was always watching over me. Jesus stood on the other side of the room, his gaze revealing his endless love for me. He whispered, "You have returned from heaven with hope and a mission. Now you have the opportunity to reshape your life." I took a deep breath and felt the determination and resolve within me. I knew that my experience in heaven had given me a new perspective and strength. And I was going to use it to change myself and those around me. Suddenly, my friend walked into the room. In that very moment, Jesus and the Virgin Mary disappeared in front of me, and their presence seemed like a mere dream. My friend told me that he came back and found me lying on the kitchen floor, so he helped me to the bed. He asked me if I needed to be taken to the hospital. I shook my head gently. I told him that I felt fine now. I explained that although something unusual had just happened, I was back to normal. I felt a sense of inner peace and no discomfort whatsoever. My friend gazed at me as if she could not believe my statement. Although Jesus and the Virgin Mary had disappeared, their blessings were still in my heart. I was now feeling very hungry because I had not eaten properly for many days. I decided to go to the supermarket to buy food. As I pushed open the door to my room, I felt the warmth of the sun, which gave me an energy that I had not felt for a long time. I then realized that I hadn't left my room for 2 months. After returning from the supermarket, I started preparing dinner. A tantalizing aroma was bubbling in the pan. Finishing the last dish, I set them on the table. My friend and I sat around the table, enjoying the food and chatting at the same time. I decided that from now on, I would face life positively and find more joy and meaning. The difficulties during this time are only temporary, and I believe I have the ability to overcome them and meet the challenges ahead. I also expressed my gratitude to my friend. When I was 15 years old, I was passionate about tennis. My cousin was a tennis coach and I looked up to him very much. Whenever I saw him gracefully wielding his tennis racket, I hoped to be like him one day. His house was not very far from mine, and there was a big tennis court in his neighborhood. That court became a place I often went to. Every weekend, I would run to play ball with him. I was very surprised by my cousin's movement and quick reaction. I learned a lot of skills from him. He always encouraged me and told me that if I practiced hard enough, I could make progress too. I remember it was a weekend. The weather was very nice that day. I met up with my brother and some of his friends to play tennis. I was very excited because I hadn't played with him for a long time. After playing for about an hour, a big wind blew across the court. We thought it wasn't a big problem and the wind would pass in a while. But after a while, the wind was still strong, so we decided to play a little longer and go home. I stared intently at the ball, trying to predict its trajectory and speed, and preparing to make a catch. However, it was at this critical moment that I accidentally got distracted. Just as I was about to catch the ball, I felt a violent shock. At that moment, I lost my balance and fell to the ground uncontrollably. My teammate's tennis racket accidentally hit me in the solar plexus, and the blow came swiftly and suddenly. It was as if I had been struck by lightning and my head was in a state of confusion. The world in front of me became blurred and distorted. I was lying on the ground, and the sounds around me were gradually blurring. My head felt unusually heavy, and I even felt a wave of nausea. Suddenly, I left my body and I was floating in midair. I could clearly see everyone standing around me, and their expressions were filled with horror and worry. I saw my cousin kneeling beside my body, pain and helplessness written all over his face. He tried to wake me up and pat my cheek. But I was unresponsive. I observed everything around me and did not feel any fear. On the contrary, a sense of calm enveloped me. It was as if I was in another world, and my connection to the real world was fading away. Although my body was no longer moving, I could feel that my consciousness was still present. The next thing I knew, I entered a light. This light emanated a warm and peaceful aura. I felt it calling to me and guiding me in an unknown direction. It was as if my soul had become lighter. Under the light, I felt an endless energy and harmony. As I went deeper and deeper, the scenery around me began to become clear. I felt I was stepping into a whole new realm, one that transcended time and space. I felt like I was merging into the energy of this light. I was no longer a single individual, but was merging with the infinite existence of the universe. The concept of time disappeared and I felt an eternal presence. I was greeted by a very beautiful lady. I saw some familiar features in her face. She smiled as she approached me and said gently, "I have been waiting for you." This statement struck me as very strange and I was filled with doubt inside. Why was she waiting for me? The lady seemed to know what I was thinking before I had a chance to say anything. She patiently explained, "Because you are lost. I've come to help you find your way again." This statement surprised me even more, and I pressed, "How did you know what I was thinking?" She smiled and replied, "Because in heaven, there are no secrets. Thoughts and emotions are transparent here, and we are able to share each other's presence." I followed up by asking, "And how do you plan to get me back on the right path?" She replied, "When you were created, you knew what you were going to be. Unfortunately, you have lost your way. If the soul is lost, it cannot find its way home." She goes on to explain that each person has their own unique mission and purpose. Your existence has meaning. But in being lost, you have forgotten your true purpose. Near-death experiences are God's way of helping them. In this particular realm, some souls choose to stay in heaven. Some souls choose to return to earth and continue back to their families. God loves all of His children and He wants them all to accomplish what they have promised to do. He does not judge them or feel anger if they do not succeed in their first attempt. God's love for us is unconditional. He gives us free will and allows us to experience and learn on earth. Even if we lose our way or experience failure at some point, God still gives us the grace and opportunity to start over. I followed up by asking, "You say I've lost my way. Then what do I need to do next?" "I need more guidance and help." She smiled and replied, "In order for you to find the right path, you must talk to your father." A little confused, I asked, "You mean I have to talk to God? But He should be very busy, right?" "Heaven is different from the real world," she explained. "God is omnipresent, and He can connect with everyone's heart at the same time. He is not too busy to listen to your heart. He is eager to communicate with you and help you find your own path." I feel very relieved to hear these words. In spite of His infinite power, God is willing to establish a close connection with each person and to listen to their prayers and conversations. Under her guidance, we came to a huge throne. The throne exuded an aura of majesty and holiness. The throne was magnificent, studded with precious stones and jewels, which shone brightly. The armrests of the throne were carved with exquisite designs. Behind the throne was a magnificent sight, as if it were a miniature of the entire universe. Although I could not see the image of God, I could clearly hear his voice. The voice seemed to be the chorus of millions of angels, full of love and power. God called out my name. It was as if I had returned to my true home. I was surprised to realize that God knew my name and that he was concerned about my existence. God asked me, "Do you remember what we discussed earlier?" Confused, I replied, "Father, I forgot, I don't remember ever talking to you." This made me feel a twinge of shame. Suddenly, a bright light shone on me and touched me deep inside. My memory began to come back gradually, and I recalled the events of the past. I had dreamed of becoming a tennis player, and I put a lot of effort into it. However, I failed to achieve what I had hoped to achieve. This failure frustrated me and made me question my choices. After that, I talked to God and I decided to become a doctor and give back to the community by helping others. God is a loving Father who did not criticize my previous failures or feel angry with me. Instead, he reminded me in this amazing encounter that he was always there for me, guiding me to find my own path. God was willing to talk to me and guide me even when I was lost. This conversation made me re-examine my dreams. I know that no matter what I have gone through in the past, God still loves me. I went on to say, I know what I should do now. I'm ready to go back. My voice was full of determination and resolve. God gently replied, I will give you another chance. If you feel that this life is a failure now, you can also stay. You can try to return to earth again later. After hearing God's words, I was very surprised. God didn't ask me to return to earth, he was willing to give me the right to choose freely. He understood my inner confusion and bewilderment, and he was willing to respect my decision. I couldn't help but ask God what would happen to my family if I chose to stay. God replied that your family would be here to reunite with you, but not until after they had completed their mission. Deep down I knew that I could not leave my family on earth. I expressed my decision to God, Father, and I was sorry that I could not leave my family on earth. God said, then here's the deal, there will be a place for you in heaven when you finish your mission. I look forward to your return. His voice was full of anticipation and made me feel his understanding and encouragement. The lady next to me asked me, "Are you ready to go back?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, ma'am. I am ready." Then, she smiled and said, "One more thing before you go, would you give my regards to your father?" This surprised and confused me, and I hastily asked, "How do you know my father?" She didn't answer my question directly. She said that there are some things beyond the limits of time and space, and that our meeting was not by chance. I felt more confused by her words and my heart was filled with curiosity. I sensed a special connection between her presence and mine. When I opened my eyes again, I appeared in the hospital. I was surrounded by a group of medical staff, who were busy working. I also saw my mother. She had been crying, and when she saw me reawaken, her expression became much calmer. I looked over at my mom and she was holding my hand tightly with concern and love in her eyes. I eagerly asked the medical staff around me, "What happened? How did I get here?" The paramedic approached me and she said softly, "It's okay, you're going to be fine. You have just experienced an accident and we are doing our best to provide you with treatment." My father also came into the room when he heard that I was awake. I said to my father, "A lady in heaven asked me to say hello to you." The people around me looked at me with strange eyes. When I got home, my father took me to sit on the couch with a hint of curiosity on his face. He said to me gently, "Son, I would like to hear more details about that lady. Can you describe her and let me know who she is?" I took a deep breath and started describing the lady. I told him that she had thick, curly blonde hair and eyes as bright as a deep lake. Her smile was full of warmth. I tried to remember every detail of the lady and described her as clearly as possible to my father. My father listened quietly, and an expression of disbelief gradually appeared on his face. Suddenly, my father stood up and walked into the family storage room. I followed him curiously, wondering what he was up to. He found a very old book. Then he took out a picture from it. I looked carefully at the woman in the photo. She had gentle eyes and a sweet smile, and I felt a familiar closeness. My eyes widened and I excitedly said to my father, "Yes, that's her. This is the lady who guided me in heaven." He explained that she was your grandmother, my mother. She left us before you were born. I was blown away by the fact that I couldn't understand why I was meeting her and that she looked so young and beautiful. We sat together and my father shared with me his memories of my grandmother as he described her kindness and wisdom.